A dazzling Christmas party. Music, champagne, and blinking lights. But in the midst of the celebration, the unthinkable happens. A millionaire loses control and kicks his pregnant wife in front of everyone, believing his power and money will protect him from any consequences. What he doesn't imagine is that tonight will expose him, humiliate his mistress, and unleash a storm that will strip away every ounce of control he thought he had. What follows is betrayal, fury, and the kind of justice you can't buy. Stay with us, because you won't believe how this ends. And before we start, tell us what time you're listening and where you're joining us from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The Christmas party sparkled with lights and laughter. Golden garlands were twisted around the marble columns. The grand piano murmured softly in the background. Waiters in impeccable uniforms floated through the room with trays of champagne and crystal glasses. The scent of pine from the imposing Christmas tree mixed with the warm sweetness of cinnamon cookies. Every corner of the ballroom seemed to glow with Christmas cheer. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the flash of cameras could be seen here and there as people took photos under the mistletoe. A children's choir had just finished singing carols, leaving a sigh of nostalgia in the air. For a brief moment, the millionaire at the center of it all seemed to have created the perfect evening, the perfect illusion of wealth and power wrapped in red and gold. But that illusion shattered in an instant. It all began with a raised voice. His words cut through the carols like broken glass. A few heads turned, but the music kept playing. Then his hand clenched into a fist by his side, and his jaw tensed so much that the veins in his temple pulsed. His wife, visibly pregnant, was a few steps away in an emerald dress that glowed under the lights. She moved closer, perhaps to calm him, perhaps to protect the baby she carried in her womb. And then it happened. In front of dozens of guests, under the glow of thousands of Christmas lights, the millionaire pulled his leg back and lashed out with his polished shoe. The blow connected with his wife's stomach. The sound was a dull thud, and the gasp from the crowd was louder than any carol. Her body doubled over, her arms instinctively wrapping around her belly as she fell to the marble floor. The crystal glass she held shattered beside her, the fragments scattering like pieces of ice. The music stopped. The pianist's hands froze on the keys. A woman in the back screamed. Phones were raised. Cameras were recording, their red lights blinking like 1,000 fixed eyes. Everyone's faces lost color. No one moved, as if time had stopped in the face of such cruelty. The wife struggled to breathe, her hands trembling over her dress. Her eyes filled with tears, not just of pain, but of disbelief. She whispered something that only those closest could hear, a plea, a broken prayer that seemed to beg for the night to rewind and erase what had happened. But there was no turning back. The evidence was captured on dozens of cameras. A man near the tree murmured, "He kicked her." His voice broke with shock. Another guest whispered in response, "Yeah, oh my God, he did." The millionaire stood tall, his chest heaving, his eyes burning not with shame, but with fury. He looked at his wife on the floor as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience at his perfect evening. His arrogance filled the silence like poison. And then, little by little, the silence broke. The crunch of glass under shoes as guests rushed forward. Someone yelled, "Call an ambulance!" Another voice, urgent and trembling, said, "She's pregnant, help her!" But above the shouts and the commotion, there was one detail that was impossible to ignore. In a corner of the ballroom, mounted above the garlands and wreaths, the red light of a camera blinked relentlessly. It didn't look away. It didn't pause. It didn't miss a second. The room could hold its breath, but the camera kept recording. Everyone knew instantly. It wasn't a private act of cruelty. It was evidence. It was truth, and the world would see it. Suspense. 27 minutes earlier, no one would have predicted the downfall of that night. The echo of the broken glass still resonated as the woman trembled on the floor. Her emerald dress spread out like a fallen wave, now stained with glass fragments that shone under the light. The lights of the tree flickered innocently, out of place in the nightmare unfolding. The guests stood motionless, with their glasses half raised, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Her face was pale, her breathing short. One hand clung to her belly, the other to the floor for support. Makeup ran down her cheeks with the tears. The proud smile she had shown in photos that night had disappeared. In its place was pure fear. The fear that engulfs not only a woman's heart, but also the future she carries within her. The silence broke when a woman in a sequined dress let out a shriek. Whispers arose afterwards, first low and frantic, then louder until they became open horror. "Did he really do it? In front of everyone? She's pregnant!" As best she could, the wife tried to get up, but her body was trembling. That effort caused a new moan from the crowd. Two guests rushed to help her. A waiter dropped his tray and knelt beside her with trembling hands. Now all the phones were up. The screens shone like small spotlights, capturing every angle. A man whispered into his microphone, live streaming. The scene was expanding beyond the ballroom, reaching the homes of strangers who gasped in real time. In a corner, a girl from the choir clung to her mother's leg, her huge eyes reflecting the horror she couldn't yet comprehend. The music had stopped, but the silence was more deafening than any song. The millionaire remained motionless, as if nothing affected him. His face was hard, his gaze cold. He didn't lean over his wife. He didn't offer help. He only watched her with contempt, as if she had embarrassed him in front of his guests. That contempt fueled everyone's outrage. A man in a tuxedo stepped forward and pointed a trembling finger. "You kicked her. We all saw it. You kicked your pregnant wife." His words cut through the air like a knife. The millionaire's jaw tensed, but he didn't reply. He adjusted his cufflinks. His silence was an arrogant denial. Meanwhile, the wife fought to regain her strength. She placed a hand on her belly and whispered almost audibly, "Please, my baby." That plea ignited the room. The spell of silence broke. Several women ran to cover her. A guest took out her phone to call an ambulance. Another demanded that the music not be resumed. Oh well, no one is touching those instruments. This is not a party anymore. In the corner, a journalist was writing frantically. A photographer focused on her face, her pain immortalized in a flash. The weight of what had happened fell on everyone. It wasn't a private argument. It was public violence, an open wound in the middle of the celebration, and everyone knew that silencing them would make them accomplices. The wife closed her eyes, her body swaying as if she were about to fall again. An older woman held her and whispered, "Hold on, help is on the way." The crowd was stirring between horror and fury, but one truth was undeniable. The pregnant woman had been hit. The party had become a stage for cruelty, and the memory of that instant would haunt every guest, replaying in their minds long after the Christmas lights went out. The ballroom was still shaking with the echoes of the impact when the millionaire finally moved. His shiny shoes clicked on the marble as he took a deliberate step. All eyes followed him, expecting remorse, or perhaps a frantic plea for forgiveness. Instead, his lips curled into a mocking smile that erased any doubt that remained in the room. He didn't kneel beside his wife. He didn't take her hand or ask if the baby was okay. Instead, he lifted his chin and spoke with a voice so calm it chilled the blood of those who heard him. "You're all overreacting. She pushed me first. You know how dramatic she can be." The words fell like stones in the silence. There were new gasps, sharper this time, as disbelief turned into anger. The woman on the floor weakly shook her head, tears streaming down her face, her lips forming a broken "no." But he ignored her. His eyes swept over the guests as if daring them to contradict him. A guest whispered, "Is he blaming her, after what we saw?" Another replied, "Unbelievable. He's trying to twist this." The mistress, a few steps away in a crimson dress that shone like fire, approached him. Her expression was cold, her smile subtle, but triumphant. She slipped her hand into the millionaire's arm, as if to support him, although her gesture had more arrogance than comfort. "It wasn't his intention," she muttered in a voice that was heard throughout the room. "The pregnancy makes her unstable. Everyone knows hormones can cause these outbursts." Her words cut the air and left many women in the room seething with rage. A man in the back yelled, "We saw it! Don't you dare blame her condition!" But the mistress only squeezed the millionaire's arm tighter, daring anyone to confront her. The millionaire took the opportunity to continue. "She's making a show. Do you think I would hurt my own child? Of course not. You all misunderstood what you saw. This is her acting, nothing more." But the evidence was on the floor. His wife's trembling body, her hand on her belly, her sobs echoing off the walls. No explanation could erase that image. "However," he insisted, his voice rising, frustration sharpening his words, "don't turn this party into a circus because of her weakness. She embarrassed me, and she embarrassed herself. That's all." The arrogance was unbearable. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, anger running like a tide. A woman near the piano shook her head in disgust. "Weakness? She's fighting to protect her baby, and he calls it weakness." The millionaire didn't stop. He looked towards the cameras that were still raised, the red lights blinking as they recorded every syllable. His smile hardened. "Turn that off. You have no right to film my family's affairs. Delete those recordings before I sue you all." The order fell on deaf ears. No camera was lowered. On the contrary, more guests raised their phones, determined to also capture his cruelty. The tension grew denser, like a taut wire vibrating with every heartbeat. On the floor, his wife opened her eyes. Through her tears, she found her voice, weak but firm. "This isn't weakness. It's truth, and everyone here saw it." The guests murmured in agreement. The tide was turning, and although he didn't see it, his power was already slipping from his hands. Still, he clung to his arrogance like armor. "You believe her?" he scoffed. "After everything I've built, after all the wealth and opportunities I've given you, you prefer to believe a hysterical woman?" Those words sealed his image in the eyes of the witnesses. There was no possible interpretation or illusion to hide behind. He had chosen cruelty over compassion, denial over truth, and the ballroom, once filled with laughter, now throbbed with outrage. The ballroom, already charged with tension, focused its attention when the mistress stepped forward. Her crimson dress shone under the lamps, each step resonating with an almost theatrical confidence. The crowd instinctively parted, making way for her as if she owned the place. Her lips curved into a slow smile, and her eyes, cold and sharp, settled on the fallen wife like a predator, savoring her advantage. She clung to the millionaire's arm and rested her head on his shoulder in a gesture that was both intimate and public. The movement was deliberate. It was meant to humiliate. "He chose me," she said in a silky but cutting voice. "Not her. Not the woman on the floor. Look at him. A man like this deserves a partner who is his equal, not one who drags him down. The guests gasped. The murmurs ran like wildfire. A woman near the bar muttered, "Did she just say that? While his wife is still on the floor?" The cruelty of her words made even the most powerful uncomfortable. The mistress was not finished. She raised her hand, showing a diamond ring that sparkled in the light. It wasn't from that night. It was a secret gift, proof of a bond that had been hidden until that moment. "See this?" she asked, turning her hand so the cameras would catch it. "He promised me this future long before she ever imagined it." "Oh, yeah." The wife gasped from the floor, her tearful eyes fixed on the ring. The betrayal was no longer a rumor. It was shown with pride and broadcast to every witness. The mistress laughed softly, a sound loaded with arrogance. While she was playing the perfect wife, I was the one he called at night, the one he traveled with, the one who knew his secrets. She held on to his last name, but I have his heart. The cruelty was unbearable. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others looked at her with open contempt. But she fed on the attention. She wanted it all. She took her phone from her purse and held it up as if daring anyone to question her. On the screen was an unmistakable photo. The millionaire hugging her during a holiday in Europe, his lips on her hair, the date and place clearly visible in the corner. "Here's your proof," she said condescendingly. "This isn't a simple romance in the shadows. This is real. We are real. And she is nothing more than a shadow of a wife clinging to a role she no longer deserves." The wife's sobs intensified. She tried to speak, but her voice broke into fragments. "How could you, in front of everyone?" The mistress tilted her head, her smile intact. "Because the lies end tonight. He belongs to me. The sooner you accept it, the less it will hurt." There were new gasps among the guests. The cameras were capturing not only the mistress's arrogance, but the evidence she had decided to show. A journalist in the corner whispered into her recorder, "This is more than a scandal. It's the public destruction of a marriage." The mistress was reveling in the chaos she had created. Her eyes shone with triumph as she leaned towards the millionaire and pressed her lips to his cheek in plain sight of everyone. The room erupted in boos, murmurs, and furious whispers. She pulled away and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tonight proves what I always knew. He's mine, and nothing she does can change it." The arrogance was total. The humiliation, deliberate. The wife lay broken. The husband was an accomplice, and the mistress occupied the center of the stage, convinced she had already won. But the night was far from over. The ballroom felt like a storm about to break. The mistress had displayed her victory with ruthless pride, but the weight of her arrogance had also ignited fury among the guests. All eyes turned back to the millionaire, expecting him to deny it, to crumble under the shame, or to seek some form of apology. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, his jaw firm as stone, and his voice resonated with cold authority. "Everyone be quiet," he declared. "Do you think a room full of nobodies can decide my fate? I built this empire. I paid for this celebration. I control what's published tomorrow. And believe me, if anyone dares to speak against me, your careers, your businesses, your families will suffer for it." The words froze the crowd, but not with respect. They froze with shock and disgust. The arrogance of his declaration spread like poison. He took another step, his gaze sweeping the room, landing on the raised phones and the blinking cameras. His voice became deeper. "Turn them off, all of them. I have lawyers who will take everything you own if a single clip from tonight appears anywhere." A murmur ran through the guests, but no one lowered their phone. On the contrary, more devices were raised in the air, determined to also record his cruelty. The mistress leaned into him, whispering something that was meant to sound encouraging, but loud enough to be heard by those nearby. Make them see who you are. Make them see what real power is. Emboldened, he continued. I can cancel contracts before dawn. I can end careers with a single phone call. Do you understand who I am? Do you really think the world is going to believe a hysterical, crying woman before me? There were exclamations. A man in a tuxedo shook his head, incredulous. Unstable? She's bleeding on the floor, and you call her unstable? The millionaire ignored him. His voice rose, bouncing off the marble walls. This is my narrative. I decide what lives and what dies in the news cycle. Tomorrow, this story will disappear. She will disappear, and anyone foolish enough to defy me will regret it. The cruelty of his words hung in the air. His wife lay trembling, hugging her belly, while his threats covered her like waves meant to drown all hope. Her sobs grew fainter, but her eyes, red and swollen, were fixed on him. In disbelief. In the back of the ballroom, a reporter dared to speak. You can't silence the truth. Not tonight. Not with all of us watching. The millionaire's laugh was dry, hollow. The truth? I manufacture the truth. You live off my money, my sponsorships, my companies. If I withdraw my hand, you'll collapse. Don't test me. A new silence fell. For the first time that night, the guests not only felt indignation, but also a growing fear. His power had always been a whisper in boardrooms, hidden behind contracts. Now it was an open shout, launched like a weapon in everyone's face. But fear didn't erase the evidence. The cameras were still rolling, the phones were still streaming, and behind the arrogance of his voice was a slight tremor. A crack in his armor. He wasn't just threatening. He was desperate. The wife whispered from the floor, her voice weak, but loud enough to be heard. You can't buy silence forever. Her words hit harder than any of his threats. The crowd stirred again. The murmurs grew, and public opinion in that room was turning against him with every second. Although he stood tall, wrapped in wealth and power, the millionaire's threats had revealed his fear. The empire he boasted about had never seemed so fragile. The threats were still hanging in the air when the millionaire broke. His mask of calm shattered, and in its place a fury so raw emerged that the entire ballroom felt its heat. He leaned over, grabbed his wife's arm, and lifted her violently, eliciting a new collective scream from those present. She whimpered, staggering to her feet, her emerald dress torn at the hem, her face contorted with pain. See this? He yelled, holding her up as if she were an exhibit. This is the woman who dares to humiliate me. This is the weakness you pity, and I will not be mocked at my own celebration. The cameras flashed. The guests backed away, some covering their mouths, others recording with trembling hands. His wife could barely stand. Her sobs filled the room, raw and uncontrollable. Mascara ran down her cheeks as she hugged her belly with her other hand. Please, stop. The baby. But he didn't stop. He shoved her against the Christmas tree. The decorations tinkled, and some glass baubles shattered at her feet, scattering red and gold fragments on the marble. The lights twinkled cheerfully, grotesquely out of place in the face of the cruelty unfolding. A man yelled, "Stop! You're hurting her!" But the millionaire only sneered with contempt. His arrogance roared louder than reason. She's mine. She belongs to me, and I decide how this night will be remembered. The mistress laughed, a high-pitched, cutting sound. She clapped once, mockingly, as if it were all a show for her amusement. Her ring shone again, catching the light as she raised her hand and provoked. Look at her, crying in front of all of you, and yet he's still by my side. That should tell you everything. The humiliation was unbearable. The wife tried to hold herself up, her hands trembling as she whispered, "Why? Why here? Why now?" Her words were swallowed by the murmur of the crowd and the constant click of the cameras. The millionaire leaned in, his voice venomous, though every microphone caught his words. "Why are you embarrassing me? Because you were never enough. Tonight the world sees it too." He tugged at the fabric of her dress, tearing the sleeve and leaving her arm bare to the cold. The guests gasped again, horrified, some begging him to stop, others calling security. "You're destroying yourself," a voice shouted. "Everyone is watching." But the millionaire was reveling in the attention. He turned to the crowd and raised his voice. "Let them watch. Let them see what happens when loyalty is broken. She had her chance and she failed me. From tonight on, she is nothing." The wife fell to her knees, her tears wetting the marble and mixing with the shiny fragments of the broken decorations. Her hands pressed on the floor as if it were the only thing holding her up. The pain in her body was only surpassed by the shame that burned in her soul. The crowd erupted, no longer in silence, but in fury. Voices clashed in the air. "Monster!" someone shouted. "You'll pay for this!" another exclaimed. The camera flashes became relentless, a rhythm of evidence impossible to erase. In the corner, the red light of the main camera never wavered. It captured every cruel word, every violent gesture, every The evidence was no longer hidden. It was undeniable, immortalized in recordings that would outlive that night. The mistress remained proud by his side, radiant in her apparent victory, but the guests no longer looked at her with envy. They looked at her with hatred. The sympathy had completely shifted. The woman on the floor was no longer just a victim. She was the center of the truth, the proof of his cruelty, and the symbol of his power crumbling. The humiliation that he thought would destroy her had destroyed him in the eyes of the world. For a long moment, the wife remained kneeling on the marble floor, her sobs echoing under the bright Christmas lights. The crowd murmured, divided between outrage and disbelief, while the millionaire's arrogance loomed over her like a shadow. He had humiliated her. He had tried to silence her, and he thought she would stay on the floor forever. But something changed in her eyes. She took a trembling breath, one hand resting on her belly, and the other grabbing the fragments of a broken decoration near her knee. Slowly, with pain, she stood up. Her emerald dress was torn. Mascara was running down her face. Her hair hung in wet, tear-soaked strands. But her back straightened, her shoulders squared, and her gaze fixed on the man who had once sworn to protect her. "No more," she whispered at first. The words were soft, but they were heard in the silence. A shiver ran through the room. She raised her voice, firmer now. "I said, no more." The millionaire froze, surprised. His smile broke. He had expected her to remain broken, to beg. Instead, she stood taller, her firm voice resonating throughout the ballroom. "Do you think you own me? Do you think your money gives you power over my life? But tonight, in front of everyone here, I'm telling the truth. You can no longer control me." There were gasps. A woman covered her mouth. A man near the stage murmured, "She's standing up to him." At last, her voice gained strength, every word loaded with the pain he himself had caused. "You called me weak. You said I was unstable. But what you saw tonight wasn't weakness. It was your cruelty. And I will not be your victim for another second." The mistress scoffed, trying to interrupt. "Sit down before you embarrass yourself again." But the wife turned her head, her eyes burning with defiance. "The shame is living a lie. The shame is standing by a man who treats women like possessions. You can wear his ring. You can show his photos, but you can't erase what the world has witnessed tonight." The guests began to murmur and stir. Phones were raised higher, cameras focused closer. For the first time that night, the wife's voice was the dominant sound in the room. She walked closer to her husband, her voice unwavering. "You humiliated me, but you also exposed yourself. Everyone here has seen your true face. They won't forget it, and I won't forgive you." The millionaire's hands were trembling at his sides. His power, so carefully maintained, was crumbling in the face of her resistance. The wife lifted her chin, her eyes moist but firm. "You thought tonight would destroy me, but tonight has set me free. I will not be silent. I will not hide, and I will not let you decide who I am." The room erupted in murmurs of support. Someone yelled, "Be strong! We're with you!" Another voice said, "Say it all. Don't hold back." Her body still hurt. Her pregnancy made her fragile, but her spirit burned brighter than the chandeliers. She was no longer just the woman on the floor. She was the voice of resistance, the symbol of truth. And as she stood up to her husband, her tears turned to fire. "Tonight," she declared, "I choose to fight, and I will never be silent again." The ballroom roared with applause and cheers. The tide had turned. The victim was no longer helpless. She was becoming a survivor. The wife's voice still hung in the air, her declaration resonating against the marble walls. The crowd, previously paralyzed by fear, now murmured in waves of approval. The phones were recording every second. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance weakening under the weight of her courage. His mistress whispered in his ear, urging him to regain control. But before he could speak, the ballroom doors burst open. A gust of cold winter air swept through the room. All heads turned. In the doorway was a figure in a red Santa Claus suit, a white beard hanging, boots covered in snow. At first, some guests laughed nervously, thinking it was part of a misguided entertainment. But then the man ripped off the fake beard, and the atmosphere changed instantly. It was the mistress's husband. A murmur ran through the room. Some said his name with disbelief. He wasn't just any man. He was a respected lawyer, known for his sharp mind and his tireless pursuit of justice. And now he was there, his eyes burning with fury, his presence dominating the room as if it were a courtroom. He advanced, his voice firm but filled with contained anger. "I came tonight because I suspected lies. I wore this suit because I was invited as a joke, a curtain so I wouldn't suspect. But what I found is no joke. It's a crime." The mistress paled, her arrogance crumbling. She staggered back, clutching her handbag as if it could protect her. "You weren't supposed to be here," she whispered. But he ignored her, his eyes fixed on the millionaire. "You put your hands and feet on a pregnant woman," he said firmly, his words echoing in the silence. "You humiliated her in front of everyone, and you dared to threaten the very people who witnessed your cruelty. Do you really think there will be no consequences?" The millionaire scoffed, trying to regain his arrogance. "Stay out of this. You don't know what you're talking about." But the man in the Santa suit did not hesitate. He raised his hand, and in it, he held a USB drive. The metal shone under the lamp. "Actually, I know everything. I have recordings, messages, emails, proof of your affair with my wife, proof of your threats, and now, thanks to every phone and camera in this room, proof of your violence. Tonight, you're finished." The crowd erupted, voices raised in disbelief and vindication. The guests pointed at the millionaire, shouting, "We saw it too! We have the videos!" The wife, still trembling but standing, exhaled when she saw the man who had just changed everything. She whispered, "Thank God." Her eyes shone with hope for the first time that night. The mistress tried to intervene, her voice high-pitched with panic. "He's lying. You're just jealous, mate." But her husband silenced her with a gaze colder than ice. "No, your lies are over. You betrayed me, and now you're exposed in front of everyone. Tonight, you're not just a mistress. You're an accomplice to his cruelty." The tension in the ballroom exploded. Some applauded. Others shouted with rage against the millionaire and his mistress. The party atmosphere had transformed into a courtroom, the light of the lamps shining not as a celebration, but as a spotlight of truth. The man in the Santa suit stepped closer, his voice louder so no one would misunderstand his words. "Justice isn't blind tonight. It has eyes, dozens of them, and they're all watching. You can't hide, you can't silence us, and you can't erase what has been seen." The millionaire's face lost its color. For the first time all night, the fear was his. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The husband in the Santa suit remained standing, his words still echoing in the marble chamber. The crowd moved closer, with their phones held high, recording the moment the story unfolded before their eyes. The millionaire, once so full of arrogance, suddenly looked small under the lit chandeliers. His hands were trembling, his eyes moving like those of a man looking for an exit that no longer existed. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. This isn't real. You're being manipulated. None of this can be proven." But his words had no weight. Every phone, every camera, every witness in the room was proof. His denial was lost, swallowed by the storm of outrage that was growing around him. The mistress staggered back, her crimson dress suddenly seeming less like a symbol of triumph and more like a scarlet mark of shame. Her eyes searched for her husband, the man who had exposed her betrayal so brutally. She tried to make an excuse, her voice high-pitched and desperate. "Please, it's not what you think. He promised me. He said he would leave her." The crowd erupted with gasps and murmurs of rage. Some guests laughed bitterly at her attempt to rewrite the truth. A woman near the tree hissed, "We all saw the photos. We heard your words." "You can't deny it now." The mistress's mask broke completely. Her perfect smile crumbled. Tears stained her makeup, running down her face. She clung to her diamond ring as if it could restore her dignity. But the ring, once a symbol of stolen power, now shone as proof of her downfall. The millionaire tried to speak again, his words stumbling over each other. "I can fix it. I can make it disappear. Just give me time." His voice was frantic, no longer commanding, but pleading. He looked at the mistress as if she could still support him, but she pulled away, her heels echoing on the marble as she sought to distance herself from the sinking ship he had become. Her betrayal came quickly. "He forced me into this," she yelled, pointing at the man she had once claimed as her own. "He said he would ruin me if I refused. I never wanted this." The guests roared with disbelief. A man shouted from the back, "Liar! You showed it off in front of her. We all saw how you mocked his wife." The mistress collapsed into a chair, her sobs filling the air. Her arrogance had disappeared, replaced by the trembling of someone whose world had fallen apart in an instant. The cameras captured every tear, every broken plea. The same attention she had desired was now the focus of her disgrace. Meanwhile, the millionaire remained motionless. Sweat covered his forehead. He wiped it with a trembling hand, but the gesture only made him look weaker. His empire, once unshakable, seemed to be crumbling in real time. The journalists were whispering frantically into their microphones. A voice rose above the others. "The shareholders are already reacting. This scandal is spreading faster than any rumor he's ever faced." The crowd's judgment was no longer hidden in murmurs. The guests were shouting openly, "Monster, coward, abuser." Each word fell like a stone, burying him under the weight of the truth. His wife was nearby, supported by several women who were gently caring for her. Her face was pale, but her eyes were firm, watching how the man who had broken her spirit was now destroying himself. She didn't need to raise her voice. The silence of her gaze spoke more than any accusation. The mistress buried her face in her hands. The millionaire lowered his head. The power he had clung to so tightly was slipping through his fingers, and in its place, only ruin remained, captured forever on the screens of those who had witnessed his downfall. For the first time all night, the ballroom no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth. The ballroom that had once resonated with laughter and music now carried the heavy silence of a reckoning. The broken glass still glittered on the marble floor. The tree lights flickered faintly, and the smell of spilled champagne hung in the air. The millionaire stood hollow, his face colorless, sweat dripping from his temples. The mistress was slumped in a chair, her mascara smeared, her sobs muffled against her trembling hands. Both had been stripped of their pride, their power, and their illusion of control. In contrast, the wife stood tall, her emerald dress torn, her hair messy, her cheeks stained with tears, and yet she radiated a strength that no cruelty could erase. The guests surrounded her, not as silent witnesses, but as protectors. Their eyes reflected admiration, not pity. They had seen her resistance, and now they saw her reclaim her place. The husband in the Santa suit stood by her side, his presence imposing, but kind. He addressed the crowd in a clear and firm voice. Tonight we saw violence, we saw betrayal, but we also saw truth. And the truth will not be buried, not by money, not by threats, not by lies. His words moved the guests, unleashing applause, murmurs of agreement, and even tears from those who were moved. The police entered his ballroom, their uniforms gleaming under the chandelier. The millionaire tried to protest, his voice cracking. "You can't arrest me. I pay for half of this city. I'm untouchable." But the officer's tone was firm. "Nobody is untouchable. You assaulted your wife in front of dozens of witnesses. You'll answer for it." The sound of handcuffs closing on his wrists silenced his last protest. The guests watched as the man who once dominated every room was led out, head bowed, his arrogance dissolved. The cameras captured every step, ensuring that his fall would be remembered long after those walls. The mistress looked up, her tear-stained face searching for compassion. But she found none. Her own husband looked at her with eyes colder than steel. "You wanted the spotlight," he said in a low voice. "Now you have it." She collapsed into her seat, defeated, as whispers of repulsion surrounded her. The wife took a deep breath, her hand resting protectively on her belly. The chaos of the night had not broken her. It had revealed her resilience. Her voice, calm but firm, filled the room. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it was a test. And even though I fell to the floor, I will not stay there. My son will not grow up in the shadow of violence. We will rise above this. The crowd erupted in applause, not the superficial applause of a gala, but the sincere applause of those who had witnessed bravery. Some guests were crying, others cheering, their voices lifting her higher than the chandeliers. The music did not return. In its place, the sound of unity filled the room. The guests surrounded her, offering jackets to cover her torn dress, water to calm her, phones to call those she trusted. She was no longer alone. Outside, snowflakes were falling softly, covering the city in purity. As she left the ballroom, with her hand still on her belly, the cold air caressed her cheeks like a promise. A new beginning was waiting for her beyond those doors. The night had begun with humiliation, but it ended with triumph. Justice had spoken, and the chains of silence had been broken. And when the cameras finally came down, one truth remained clear. No wealth, no lies, and no cruelty could ever bury the strength of a woman who chose to stand up.